The blood on the kitchen tiles wasn't hers, but the dark, blooming bruises painting her arms told a story she had spent 3 years trying to hide. Penelope never expected the most dangerous man in the city to be the one to finally ask who hurt her. She was just a heavily built chef trying to disappear in the background of his criminal empire. But when a ruthless mob boss finds you crying over his stove, you don't just get a tissue, you get a war. The kitchen of the Castiglione estate was the size of a small restaurant, gleaming with brushed stainless steel, imported Italian marble, and the low, constant hum of commercial refrigerators. For Penelope Gallagher, it was the closest thing she had to a sanctuary. Penelope was not the kind of woman who belonged in the glamorous, cutthroat world of Roman Castiglione. The women who draped themselves over the velvet sofas in the billiard room upstairs were sharp-angled, hollow-cheeked, and dressed in silk slips that cost more than Penelope's car. Penelope, on the other hand, was soft. She was undeniably fat, carrying her weight in odd hips, a thick waist, and heavy thighs that rubbed together under her chef's apron. She had spent most of her 28 years trying to make herself smaller, apologizing for the space she occupied, and shrinking under the cruel, judgmental eyes of a world that demanded perfection. But in the kitchen, her size didn't matter. Her worth was measured in the perfect sear on a scallop, the glossy sheen of a dark chocolate ganache, and the precise forked tender pull of braised short ribs. Here, she wasn't too much. She was the creator of everything good. Tonight, however, the sanctuary felt suffocating. Penelope stood at the massive prep island, her trembling hands trying to pipe ricotta, filling into freshly fried cannoli shells. The high-stakes poker game happening 2 floors up had been going on for 6 hours. Men with heavy gold watches, concealed carry permits, and blood on their ledgers were drinking $100 bourbon and eating the food she had spent 2 days preparing. She squeezed the pastry bag, but her grip faltered. A sharp, radiating pain shot up her left forearm, a brutal reminder of the morning she had endured before putting on her pristine white chef's coat. Bradley. Just the thought of her husband's name made the acid rise in the back of her throat. Bradley Hayes was a decorated vice detective for the city, a man who smiled for the cameras and shook hands with the mayor. Behind the closed doors of their suburban home, he was a monster who drank cheap whiskey to fuel his deep-seated insecurities. He hated his job, he hated his lack of promotion, but most of all, he hated Penelope's body. He weaponized her weight against her, constantly telling her that no one else could ever love a woman so large, so disgusting. And when his words weren't enough to break her spirit, his fists did the rest. That morning, she had accidentally burned his toast. It was a minor mistake, easily fixed, but Bradley had used it as an excuse. He had grabbed her by the arm, his thick fingers digging so deeply into her flesh that she felt the muscle bruise instantly against the bone, throwing her against the kitchen counter. "You're a useless, fat cow, Penny," he had sneered, his breath hot and reeking of stale alcohol. "The only reason I let you out of this house to cook for those mobsters is because it pays the mortgage." Penelope blinked hard, snapping back to the present. The kitchen of the Castiglione estate was warm, but a cold sweat had broken out across her forehead. She set down the pastry bag and leaned heavily against the marble island, her chest heaving. The heavy cotton of her long-sleeved chef's coat felt like sandpaper against her battered arms. She had rolled the sleeves up just an inch to keep them out of the powdered sugar, exposing her wrists. She thought about leaving. She thought about walking out the back door, getting into her beat-up sedan, and just driving until the gas ran out. But where would she go? Bradley was a cop. He had friends in every precinct. He had access to traffic cameras, license plate readers, and cell phone towers. There was no escaping him. He had made sure she knew that. A choked sob escaped her lips before she could stop it. The overwhelming weight of her reality, the physical pain, the emotional exhaustion, the crushing isolation, finally broke through her carefully constructed defenses. Penelope covered her face with her flour-dusted hands, her broad shoulders as shaking as she wept into the empty, gleaming kitchen. She tried to stay quiet, terrified that one of the armed guards roaming the perimeter would hear her. She was so entirely consumed by her grief that she didn't hear the heavy, measured footsteps coming down the back staircase. She didn't hear the heavy oak door swing open, and she certainly didn't feel the presence of the most feared man on the eastern seaboard until he spoke. "Is the ricotta spoiled, or are you just heavily invested in the tragedy of pastries?" The voice was a low, gravelly baritone laced with a faint old-world cadence that commanded absolute silence. Penelope gasped, violently jerking her hands away from her face. She spun around, her hip colliding hard with the edge of the counter, sending a metal whisk clattering to the floor. Standing in the doorway was Roman Castiglione. He was 34, impeccably dressed in a charcoal-gray suit, with the tie loosened and the top 2 buttons of his crisp white shirt undone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated an aura of quiet, lethal authority. Roman wasn't a loud man. He didn't yell, he didn't boast. He just looked at you with those piercing, ice-blue eyes, and you immediately knew exactly how easily he could erase you from existence. Penelope froze, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She swiped frantically at her wet cheeks, instantly mortified. She was a crying, sweaty, overweight mess in the presence of a man who demanded absolute perfection in every aspect of his life. "Mr. Castiglione," she stammered, her voice thick and raspy. I'm so sorry. I didn't hear you come down. Do you need something? More ice? The steak skewers are." "I don't need ice, Penelope," Roman interrupted smoothly, stepping into the kitchen. He knew her name. The realization sent a strange shiver down her spine. The boss of the Castiglione family knew the name of his weekend caterer. He moved with the lazy grace of an apex predator, walking over to the island. He didn't look at the food. His pale eyes were fixed entirely on her red, tear-stained face. "I asked you a question. Why are you crying in my kitchen?" "It's nothing," she lied quickly, stepping back. She instinctively tried to fold her arms over her stomach, a nervous habit to hide her bulk. I burned my hand on the oven earlier. The sting caught me off guard." "It's nothing, sir." Roman tilted his head, his gaze dropping to her hands. They were unblemished, aside from a faint dusting of flour. "You burned your hand," he repeated, the words slow and dripping with quiet disbelief. "Yes, show me." Penelope's breath hitched. "It's really fine, Mr. Castiglione. I don't want to bother you with." "Show me the burn, Penelope." It wasn't a request. It was an order delivered with a terrifying, soft finality. Trembling, Penelope slowly extended her right hand, praying he wouldn't look too closely. Roman didn't reach for her hand. Instead, he stepped closer. The scent of him, expensive cedar cologne, Cuban tobacco, and something dark and inherently dangerous enveloped her. He was so close, she had to tilt her head up to meet his eyes. "I don't like liars in my house," Roman said softly, his eyes searching hers. "Especially not the ones who make the best braised short ribs in the state." Despite her terror, a tiny fractured piece of Penelope's heart warmed at the compliment. She looked down at the floor, unable to hold his piercing gaze. "I'm sorry, I was having a moment of overwhelm. I'll pack up my things. If you want to fire me, I understand." "Did I say I was firing you?" Roman stepped even closer, completely invading her personal space. He wasn't repulsed by her size. He didn't look at her with the familiar disgust she saw in Bradley's eyes. If anything, The intense focus in Roman's gaze made her feel seen in a way that was entirely terrifying. He reached out. Penelope expected him to point to the door. Instead, his large, warm hand wrapped gently around her left wrist to move her hand away from her stomach. The moment his fingers made contact with her skin, the pain from Bradley's grip that morning flared to life. Penelope violently flinched, a sharp hiss escaping her lips as she yanked her arm back, as if she had been burned. Roman's entire demeanor changed in a fraction of a second. The calm, detached Mafia boss vanished. In his place was something infinitely darker. His eyes dropped to her left arm. The sleeve of her chef's coat had ridden up just an inch when she pulled away. Peeking out from beneath the crisp white fabric was the sickening dark purple edge of a massive hand-shaped bruise. The kitchen went dead silent. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade into nothingness. Rowan stared at the dark mark on her pale skin. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out again. Penelope was too paralyzed by fear to move. He gripped her sleeve and gently, without asking permission, pushed the thick cotton fabric up to her elbow. The bruising was horrific. It wrapped around her thick forearm, the distinct indentations of 4 fingers, and a thumb blooming in angry shades of black, purple, and sickly yellow. It wasn't a new injury. There were older, fading yellow bruises beneath the fresh ones, telling a story of sustained, repetitive violence. Roman's thumb lightly traced the edge of the darkest mark. His touch was incredibly gentle, contrasting sharply with the sudden, violent tension radiating from his body. When he finally looked back up at her face, his blue eyes were completely black. "Who did this?" he asked. The gravel in his voice was gone, replaced by a terrifying, hollow calm. Penelope swallowed hard, tears spilling over her lashes. "No one, I fell. I'm clumsy, If you tell me you fell down the stairs, Penelope, I am going to lose my temper," Roman whispered, his eyes locked onto hers. "And you do not want to see me lose my temper. I will ask you exactly one more time. Who put their hands on you? You can't do anything," Penelope choked out, pulling her arm out of his grasp and rolling her sleeve down with shaking hands. "Please, Mr. Castiglione, just forget you saw it. I need this job. I just want to finish the canalis and go home." "Go home," Roman repeated, tasting the words like poison. "To the man who did this to you." "He's my husband," she whispered, a tear escaping and tracking through the flower on her cheek. She felt so pathetic, so utterly humiliated. The big fat chef who couldn't even stand up to her own husband. And he's not someone you can just scare away. Roman actually let out a short, dark laugh. It was a sound devoid of any humor. "Penelope, look at me." She hesitated, then brought her tear-filled eyes up to meet his. "Do you know who I am?" Roman asked softly. "Yes." "Then you know there is not a single breathing soul in this city that I cannot scare away or remove entirely." He stepped closer, crowding her against the edge of the marble island. She felt the cold stone at her back, but the heat coming off Roman's chest was overwhelming. "Give me a name." Penelope squeezed her eyes shut. Bradley Hayes. "But you don't understand, he's a cop. He's a vice detective for the 14th precinct. If you touch him, the police will bring the entire department down on your head. I'll be the one who pays for it. He told me if I ever told anyone, he'd kill me. He has a gun, he has a badge." "Bradley Hayes," Roman interrupted, the name settling heavy in the air between them. He knew the name. Roman knew every dirty cop on his payroll. And Bradley Hayes was a mid-level nuisance who had been shaking down Roman's street dealers in the South End for the past 6 months. Hayes was a coward, a man who liked to flex his badge to feel powerful. Roman had been planning to have his underboss, Dante, pay the detective a visit next week to put him back in his place. to realize that this arrogant, pathetic excuse for a man was going home to beat this soft, gentle woman. The fury that ignited in Roman's chest was something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Roman looked at Penelope. He saw the way she shrank into herself, trying to minimize her size. He saw the shame in her eyes. He had watched her for the past few weeks. She had been working for him. He had noticed the way she moved around the kitchen with absolute mastery, the way her hips swayed beneath her apron, the way her face lit up when she tasted a sauce and found the seasoning perfect. He had found himself coming down to the kitchen for water far more often than necessary, just to watch her. She thought she was invisible because of her size. She didn't know she was the only thing in this massive house that Roman actually wanted to look at. "Listen to me very carefully," Roman said, his voice dropping to a low, hypnotic register. He raised a hand and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away the tear that had fallen. Penelope gasped at the contact, her eyes flying open. "Bradley Hayes is a dead man walking." "No," Penelope panicked, gripping his wrist. Soft, plump fingers wrapped around his heavily muscled arm. "You can't. He's a cop, Roman, please." She had used his first name. Roman felt a sudden, fierce possessiveness lock into place around his ribcage. "He's a parasite," Roman corrected coldly. "He's a dirty detective who has been taking my money for 6 months. I already own him, Penelope, and now he has touched something that belongs to me." Penelope stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. "Something that belongs to me." The words hung heavily in the air, thick with a terrifying promise. Before she could process what he meant, the heavy oak door to the kitchen swung open. Dante, Roman's fiercely loyal underboss, stepped in. He stopped dead in his tracks, taking in the sight of his boss standing intimately close to the caterer, his hand on her face. "Pardon the interruption, boss," Dante said, his face carefully neutral. "But we have a situation at the front gate." Roman didn't take his eyes off Penelope. He slowly lowered his hand from her cheek. "What is it, Dante?" "A cop just pulled up to the security checkpoint. Plainclothes. Smells like cheap bourbon and entitlement," Dante reported. "He's making a scene. Says he's here to pick up his wife." Penelope's blood turned to ice. "Bradley," she staggered back, her hands flying to her mouth. "He tracked my phone," she whispered, sheer terror paralyzing her limbs. "He told me he put a tracker on my car. He's here. Oh my God, he's here. If he sees me talking to you, he'll..." She couldn't finish the sentence. The panic took over, stealing the oxygen from her lungs. She looked around the kitchen frantically, looking for a place to hide her large frame, a closet, a pantry, anywhere. Roman watched her spiral, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle ticked in his cheek. He turned to Dante. "Bring him in," Roman ordered. "Roman, please." Penelope begged, tears streaming down her face again. "He'll kill me. Let me just go out the back. Let me go to him." Roman turned back to her, his expression utterly unreadable, a terrifying mask of pure Mafia royalty. He stepped forward and gripped her shoulders, halting her frantic movements. "You are not going anywhere," Roman said, his voice absolute and unyielding. "You are going to stay right here, in my kitchen. You are going to finish piping those cannolis. And you are going to let me handle your husband." Dante nodded sharply and disappeared through the door. Penelope was trembling so violently her teeth chattered. "What are you going to do?" Roman reached out, his knuckles grazing the soft curve of her jaw. A dark, dangerous smirk ghosted across his lips. "I'm going to introduce him to the man he's been stealing from," Roman murmured. "And then I'm going to show him what happens to men who break my things." The heavy oak door swung open with a violent crash that made Penelope flinch so hard her heavy thighs bruised against the solid marble of the prep island. She shrank back, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the edge of the countertop. She felt massive and exposed, a glaring target in the pristine, brightly lit kitchen. She wanted to melt into the floor, to make her large body disappear completely, just as she had trained herself to do every time the front door of their suburban house unlocked. Bradley Hayes stumbled into the kitchen, bringing the sour, metallic stench of fear, stale cigarettes, and cheap Jim Beam with him. He was a man who relied entirely on his badge to compensate for his painfully average stature. He wore a rumpled tanned trench coat over a poorly fitted polyester suit. His face was flushed, his thinning blonde hair slicked back with sweat, and his right hand rested instinctively on the butt of the standard issue. Glock 19 holstered at his hip. Behind him, Dante stood silently, a looming shadow of tailored wool and suppressed violence. "Penny," Bradley barked, his bloodshot eyes darting around the massive room before locking onto her trembling form. He let out a derisive snort, his upper lip curling in familiar disgust. "Look at you, sweating like a pig over a stove. Get your coat, we're leaving. You embarrass me enough without moonlighting as a glorified maid for these greaseballs." Penelope opened her mouth, but her vocal cords were paralyzed. The familiar, suffocating blanket of submission dropped heavily over her shoulders. She took a tiny, hesitant step toward him, her head bowed, ready to surrender just to stop the inevitable explosion. Roman stepped directly into her path. He moved with such fluid, silent speed that Bradley actually blinked, startled by the sudden obstruction. Roman didn't draw a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, a terrifying monument of tailored charcoal wool and pure, lethal composure. He casually adjusted his cuffs, his Rolex Daytona catching the harsh fluorescent light overhead. "Detective Hayes," Rome said smoothly, his voice a low, vibrating hum that seemed to chill the very air in the room. "You have terrible manners. It is customary to knock before entering a man's home, especially when you are trespassing." Bradley puffed out his chest, completely misreading the situation. He saw a wealthy man in a nice suit and assumed he was just some rich civilian who didn't understand how the world worked. He didn't recognize the Castiglione estate. He had tracked Penelope's phone using a bootlegged police stingray device, blindly following the GPS ping to this gated compound in the affluent Highland Park district. "Trespassing?" Bradley sneered, taking a step forward and aggressively tapping his gold detective's shield pinned to his belt. "I'm a sworn officer of the law, pal, and that fat cow cowering behind you is my wife. So unless you want to catch an obstruction charge, you're going to step aside and let me take out my trash." Penelope squeezed her eyes shut, a fresh wave of humiliated tears spilling down her cheeks. Trash, that was all she was to him, a heavy, burdensome piece of garbage he was chained to. Roman didn't move. His ice-blue eyes slowly dragged up and down Bradley's frame, analyzing him with the detached curiosity of a scientist, observing a diseased insect. "Your wife," Roman repeated, testing the words. "Penelope, the woman who'd just finished preparing a perfectly seared Wagyu beef tenderloin. The woman who moves through this kitchen with more grace and skill than you have ever possessed in your miserable, pathetic life." Bradley frowned, his drunken bravado faltering for a fraction of a second. "What the hell are you talking about? Listen, buddy, I don't care how much you pay her to bake your cookies. I'm taking her home. She's my legal property. She's my legal property." The phrase hung in the air, toxic and vile. Roman's jaw tightened. The faint, polite smile vanished from his face, replaced by a mask of absolute, terrifying coldness. "Property," Roman mused softly. He took a single, slow step toward Bradley. "Tell me, Detective Hayes, do you generally treat your property with such careless disrespect? Do you make a habit of damaging the things that do not belong to you?" "She belongs to me." Bradley shouted, stepping forward to close the distance, his hand tightening on his holster. "No," Roman corrected, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "She is currently standing in my kitchen, under my roof, which makes her under my protection. And I am highly territorial, detective. Do you know who you're talking to?" Bradley spat, the veins in his neck bulging. "I'm Vice. I can have this whole place raided in an hour. I can ruin you. Now move out of my way before I arrest you for kidnapping." Roman let out a slow, dark chuckle. He turned his head slightly toward the door. "Dante, the detective seems confused about where he is." Dante stepped fully into the light, pulling a sleek, suppressed Heckler and Koch USP from his shoulder holster with one hand, while simultaneously locking the heavy oak door behind him with the other. The click of the deadbolt echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. "Detective Bradley Hayes, badge number 8442, Dante recited in a bored, monotonous tone. "Currently under investigation by Internal Affairs for skimming seized narcotics from the evidence lockup on Mercer Street, drowning in $90,000 of gambling debt to the Irish mob in Southie, and, as of the last 6 months, taking a $500 weekly bribe to look the other way when our associates move product through the 14th precinct." Bradley's face drained of all color. His arrogant sneer dissolved into an expression of sheer, unadulterated terror. He looked from Dante's suppressed pistol to Roman's unblinking, predatory stare. The alcohol in his system suddenly betrayed him, turning to lead in his stomach. "You," Bradley stammered, his eyes wide. He finally looked past the suit, past the elegant kitchen, and saw the man standing before him. "You're Castiglione." "I am," Roman said simply. "And you, detective, are a dead man who has forgotten how to breathe." The power dynamic shifted so violently that Penelope felt dizzy. She watched from the safety of the massive wolf, double ovens as her husband, the man who had terrified her, degraded her, and beaten her for 3 years, shrank into a trembling, pathetic shell of a human being. Bradley's hand fell away from his gun. He took a stumbling step backward, hitting the locked oak door. "Mr. Castiglione," he choked out, his voice cracking. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know she was working for you. I was just looking for my wife." "She is not your wife," Roman stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "She is the woman you assaulted this morning. She is the woman whose arm you bruised because you are too weak, too pathetic, and too insecure to stand beside a woman who vastly outshines you in every conceivable way." Roman walked slowly to the kitchen island. He picked up a linen napkin and meticulously wiped his hands, never breaking eye contact with the sweating detective. "You see, Bradley, I have a very strict code regarding how business is conducted in my city," Roman continued, "and you have violated several of my core tenets." Roman gestured for Dante, who pulled a folded piece of paper from his inner jacket pocket and placed it on the marble counter. "Let us review the ledger of your sins, detective," Roman said softly, tapping the paper. "In Castiglione's syndicate, extorting dealers cost a man his dominant hand, and disrespecting a don meant losing his tongue. Drawing a weapon on their grounds demanded swift execution. But laying violent hands on Penelope, that unforgivable sin guaranteed a slow, unimaginably agonizing death." Bradley stared at the paper, his knees physically knocking together. He began to hyperventilate. Please, I'll return the money. I'll double it. I'll drop off the radar. You'll never see me again. Just let me take Penelope and we'll leave the state." Penelope let out a muffled sob, terrified that Roman would agree. She was a liability. She was a problem. Why would a billionaire mob boss risk the wrath of the police department over a fat, crying caterer? But Roman didn't look at Bradley. He turned his head and looked at Penelope. His eyes softened, just a fraction, the icy blue thawing into something fiercely protective. He took in her wide, fearful eyes, the tear tracks cutting through the flour on her cheeks, and the way she was desperately trying to hide her beautiful, full figure behind the stainless steel appliances. "You misunderstand the situation, Bradley," Roman said, turning back to the detective. "You have absolutely nothing of value to offer me, except one thing." Roman reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy, gold fountain pen. He laid it gently next to the paper on the counter. "I have 3 demands," Roman instructed, his voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "First, you will sign this document. It is a full confession to your evidence tampering, your gambling debts, and your extortion. If you ever come within 50 miles of this city again, Dante will mail it directly to Internal Affairs, the FBI, and the Irish mob you owe money to. Second, you will slide your weapon, your badge, and your phone across this floor. Third, you will never, for as long as you draw breath, speak Penelope's name again. You will sign the divorce papers that my lawyers will draft by tomorrow morning. You will surrender all assets to her. You will cease to exist in her world. If you fail to meet any of these demands right now," Roman whispered, leaning forward slightly, "Dante will put a bullet in your kneecap. We will drag you to the basement, and I will personally spend the next 3 days showing you exactly how much I despise men who hit women." Bradley didn't hesitate. Weeping openly, the tough, abusive vice cop scrambled forward. With shaking hands, he snatched the gold pen and scribbled his signature at the bottom of Dante's paper. He practically ripped the Glock 19 from his holster, tossing it onto the floor along with his gold shield and his cell phone. "Done. It's done. I signed it," Bradley sobbed, backing away, holding his hands up in surrender. "She's yours. Take her. I don't care. Just let me live." Penelope felt a sickening twist in her gut. Even now, facing death, Bradley still talked about her like a piece of used furniture being handed off to a new owner. "She's yours. Take her." Roman looked at the pathetic man cowering against the door. The disgust on the Don's face was absolute. "Unlock the door, Dante," Roman ordered quietly, "and have the guards escort him to the property line. If he trips and falls on the gravel driveway, see that he isn't helped up." Dante smirked, a cold, ruthless expression. He holstered his weapon, unbolted the heavy oak door, and grabbed Bradley roughly by the collar of his cheap trench coat. "Walk, pig," Dante hissed, dragging the blubbering detective out of the kitchen and into the dimly lit service hallway. The heavy door swung shut behind them, cutting off the sound of Bradley's panicked whimpers. Silence descended upon the kitchen once more. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerators and Penelope's ragged breathing. She stood frozen behind the island, her mind unable to process the magnitude of what had just happened. 3 years of torture, 3 years of hiding bruises, covering up the verbal abuse, and shrinking herself down to nothing. And Roman Castiglione had eradicated the threat in less than 5 minutes. She was free. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her knees buckled. She didn't gracefully faint. Her heavy body simply gave out, sliding down the side of the stainless steel oven. Before she could hit the floor, Roman was there. He crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides, catching her by the shoulders. He didn't struggle with her weight. He didn't grunt or hesitate. His massive, tailored arms wrapped securely around her thick waist and broad back, pulling her flush against his chest. He easily lifted her, absorbing her weight as if she weighed nothing at all. "I've got you," Roman murmured, his voice entirely stripped of the lethal coldness he had directed at Bradley. "You are safe, Penelope. He is gone. He will never touch you again." Penelope buried her face in his chest, inhaling the scent of cedar and expensive tobacco. She gripped the lapels of his charcoal suit with flour-covered hands, ruining the expensive fabric, but she couldn't let go. She sobbed, deep, agonizing cries that tore from her chest, mourning the years she had lost and the terror she had endured. Roman simply held her. He sank to the floor with her, ignoring the mess of the kitchen, pulling her heavily built frame onto his lap. He wrapped his arms entirely around her, providing a solid, unbreakable fortress. One hand stroked her hair, while the other gently, reverently rubbed her back. "Cry," he whispered into her hair, his breath warm against her scalp. "Let it all out, mia dolcezza. You never have to be strong like that again." For the first time in her life, Penelope didn't try to make herself smaller. Wrapped in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city, she finally allowed herself to take up space. And as she wept against his chest, she realized that Roman Castiglione wasn't looking at her as a burden. He was holding her like she was the most valuable thing he had ever possessed. When Penelope finally opened her eyes, the world was completely devoid of the harsh, terrifying realities of her past. She was not in the cramped, beige bedroom of her suburban hell. She was enveloped in an ocean of ivory, fret, linens, sinking into a mattress that felt like a cloud. She sat up slowly, panic instinctively clawing at her throat before the memories of the previous night washed over her. The kitchen, Bradley's terror, Roman's massive arms lifting her from the floor. She looked down at herself. She blushed violently at the thought of who had gently removed her flour-caked chef's coat and heavy aprons. She was now drowning in a soft dark gray t-shirt that smelled intoxicatingly of cedar, expensive Cuban tobacco, and masculine heat. It was Roman's shirt. On his broad, muscular frame, it probably fit perfectly. On Penelope, it draped over her wide hips and thick thighs like a soft armor. The door to the opulent guest suite clicked open. Penelope instinctively pulled the thick duvet up to her chin, her old insecurities screaming at her to hide her fat body. Roman walked in. The ruthless Mafia boss, who had dismantled her husband's life in 5 minutes, was now balancing a silver Cristóbal breakfast tray in one hand. He was dressed down this morning, a black cashmere sweater rolled up to his forearms and dark trousers. Without the suit jacket, the sheer width of his shoulders and the thick cut of his chest were even more intimidating. "Good morning," Roman said, his gravelly voice softer than she had ever heard it. He set the tray on the bedside table. "I took the liberty of having my private physician, Dr. Aris Thorne." He paused, correcting himself. "Aris Miller, look at your arm while you slept." He applied a topical arnica ointment and wrapped it. "There is no structural damage." Penelope looked down at her left arm. The horrific bruising was securely bandaged in pristine white gauze. A fresh wave of tears pricked her eyes, but this time they weren't born of fear. "You didn't have to do all this, Mr. Castiglione," she whispered, her voice rough from crying. "I don't know how to repay you." Roman sat on the edge of the mattress. The bed dipped under his substantial weight. He reached out and gently pulled the duvet down just an inch, refusing to let her hide behind it. "My name is Roman," he corrected gently, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "And you owe me nothing. In fact, I owe you an apology." Penelope blinked, utterly confused. "For what?" Roman's jaw tightened, a dangerous muscle ticking near his ear. "Bradley Hayes is dead, Penelope." The words hung in the air. Penelope stopped breathing. She expected to feel grief, or perhaps guilt. Instead, a massive, crushing weight instantly evaporated from her chest. The monster in the dark was gone. "Dante escorted him to the city limits, exactly as I ordered," Roman continued, his voice flat, devoid of any remorse. "But your husband was not just a coward. He was a spiteful, vindictive rat. Instead of running, he drove straight to the South Boston docks. He went to Declan Callahan, the head of the Irish syndicate he owed $90,000 to." Penelope's eyes widened. Why? To offer them a trade, Roman said, his eyes darkening. He told Callahan he could get his men inside my estate. He gave them the encrypted security pin codes for the underground catering and delivery tunnels. The ones you use to bring in the groceries. He had cloned your phone weeks ago to track you, and he stole the codes. Penelope felt the blood drain from her face. Oh my God, Roman, I'm so sorry. I brought them right to your door. You brought nothing but light into this house, Roman interrupted fiercely, his hand moving to cup her jaw. His thumb stroked her cheekbone. Do not dare take the blame for a dead man's sins. Callahan executed him the moment he handed over the codes. Hayes outlived his usefulness to everyone. But the codes, Penelope panicked, trying to sit up further. If the Irish syndicate has the delivery tunnel codes, they can bypass your perimeter security. They could be coming. The deafening, high-pitched shriek of the estate's breach alarms cut through her sentence like a knife. Red emergency lights instantly flooded the hallway outside the bedroom door. The heavy, booming sound of automatic gunfire echoed from the lower levels of the mansion, rattling the crystal chandelier hanging above the bed. Roman didn't flinch. He didn't panic. The soft, gentle man who had brought her breakfast vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced by the apex predator of the eastern seaboard. He reached behind his back and drew a matte black Sig Sauer P22T6 from the waistband of his trousers. They are already here, Roman said, his voice entirely devoid of fear. He grabbed Penelope's uninjured hand, pulling her out of the bed. Stay behind me. We are going to the safe room behind the wine cellar. The wine cellar, Penelope cried, her bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. Roman, that's right next to the delivery tunnels. That's exactly where they're coming from. I know. Roman racked the slide of his weapon, his blue eyes flashing with a terrifying, bloodthirsty joy. I want to look Declan Callahan in the eyes when I kill him. The descent into the lower levels of the Castiglione estate was a nightmare painted in blood and muzzle flashes. Penelope clung to the back of Roman's sweater, her heavy body moving with a surprising, desperate agility. She was terrified, yes, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't running from the danger behind her. She was securely tethered to the most dangerous thing in the building. Roman moved like a ghost of violence. He shot with terrifying clinical precision, dropping 3 heavily armed Irish syndicate hitmen in the grand foyer without breaking his stride. He shielded Penelope entirely, his broad back absorbing any potential threat. They reached the lower stairwell leading to the massive subterranean kitchens and the adjacent wine cellar. The smell of cordet, blood, and the lingering scent of Penelope's vanilla extract hung heavily in the air. The safe room is just past the pantry, Roman whispered, pressing Penelope against the cool stone wall of the corridor. When I move, you run straight for the steel door. Dante is already inside. Do you understand? Penelope looked at his handsome, hard face. She saw the absolute certainty in his eyes. He was willing to die in this hallway, just to ensure a fat, abused caterer made it to safety. I understand, she whispered, her hands trembling. Roman nodded. He pivoted around the corner, his weapon raised. Click. The sickening sound of an empty chamber echoed in the narrow stone hallway. Roman had miscounted his rounds. Standing 10 feet away, emerging from the commercial pantry, was a towering enforcer for the Callahan syndicate. He was heavily tattooed, bleeding from his shoulder, and holding a customized short-barrel shotgun aimed directly at Roman's chest. Castiglione, the enforcer spat, racking the shotgun with a terrifying clack-clack. Declan sends his regards. Roman didn't step back. He didn't beg. He simply shifted his massive frame to completely block the hallway, ensuring the shotgun blast would tear through him and leave Penelope untouched. But Penelope Gallagher was done hiding behind men. Time seemed to slow down. She saw the enforcer's finger tightening on the trigger. She saw Roman's jaw lock in anticipation of death. And out of the corner of her eye, resting on a stainless steel prep cart in the hallway, she saw a piece of her own domain. It was a massive 12-quart Le Creuset, enameled cast-iron Dutch oven. It weighed nearly 20 pounds. It was the pot she used to braise short ribs for 12 hours. With a roar that tore from the very bottom of her soul, shedding 3 years of submission and terror, Penelope didn't run for the safe room. She lunged forward, her heavy thighs propelling her with shocking speed. She grabbed the handle of the cast-iron lid with her uninjured right hand, spinning her body weight perfectly, and swung the heavy iron like a gladiator's mace. The enforcer didn't even see her coming. He was so focused on the Mafia boss that he entirely ignored the barefoot, overweight woman in the oversized t-shirt. The heavy cast-iron lid connected with the side of the enforcer's skull with a sickening, wet crack. The force of the blow, driven by Penelope's substantial weight and pure adrenaline, instantly shattered the man's jaw and temple. The shotgun discharged harmlessly into the vaulted ceiling, showering them in plaster and dust, before the enforcer collapsed to the stone floor like a puppet with its strings cut. He didn't move. Penelope stood over the bleeding man, the heavy iron lid trembling in her hand. Her chest heaved, her breath coming in ragged, feral gasps. She expected Roman to yell at her, to call her crazy, to push her toward the safe room. Instead, the hallway went completely silent, save for the distant ringing of the alarms. She turned slowly to look at Roman. The Mafia boss was staring at her. His empty gun hung loosely by his side. His blue eyes were wide, completely entirely stripped of his usual icy composure. He looked at the shattered plaster on the ceiling, the bleeding enforcer on the floor, and finally at the magnificent, heavy-set woman standing before him like an avenging angel, gripping a piece of cookware dripping with blood. He didn't look horrified. He looked like a man who had just seen the face of God. "Penelope," Roman breathed, taking a slow step toward her. "I'm sorry," she gasped, dropping the lid. It clattered loudly against the stone floor. Panic flooded back in. "I'm sorry, He was going to shoot you, and I couldn't let him. I couldn't." Roman didn't let her finish. He closed the distance between them, grabbed her thick waist, and slammed her against the stone wall. His mouth crashed down onto hers with a desperate, consuming hunger. Penelope gasped into his mouth, shocked by the sheer force of his passion. He tasted like adrenaline and absolute power. His large hands roamed over her body, not trying to avoid her fat, but worshipping it. He gripped her wide hips, pulling her flush against his hard thighs, letting her feel exactly how much she affected him. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathless. "Never apologize to me," Roman ordered, his voice dark and thick with lust and adoration. "Do you understand? You just saved my life. You are magnificent. You are fierce. And you are entirely, completely mine." Penelope looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes, but she didn't shrink away. I'm not a trophy, Roman. I'm broken, I'm fat. I'm a mess." Roman let out a low growl. He reached down and gently touched the white bandages wrapped around her arm. "You are not broken. You are a survivor," Roman stated, his eyes burning with an intense, unwavering devotion. "And as for your body, Penelope, I have spent the last 3 weeks watching you in my kitchen, fantasizing about exactly how soft your skin is. I don't want a fragile, starving woman who breaks when the wind blows. I want you. I want the woman who can cook a feast for kings and crush a man's skull to protect what is hers." He pressed his forehead against hers. "I am going to finish cleaning the filth out of my house. Dante is going to take you into the safe room. And when this is over, you are never putting on a chef's coat for a paycheck again. You are going to sit at the head of my table, and the entire city will bow to the queen of the Castiglione syndicate." Penelope looked into the eyes of the deadliest man in the city and finally saw the one thing she had been searching for her entire life. She saw a man who didn't want her to be smaller. He wanted her to take up all the space in his world. "Okay," she whispered, a fierce, beautiful smile breaking across her face. "Go finish your business, boss. I'll be waiting." 6 months later, the Castiglione estate was quiet. The Irish syndicate had been wiped off the map, absorbed into Roman's empire. The kitchen was still massive, still gleaming with stainless steel and marble. But Penelope was no longer wearing a caterer's uniform. She stood at the stove wearing a custom-tailored emerald silk dress that hugged every lush, heavy curve of her body. A massive, flawless diamond rested comfortably on her left ring finger. Sparkling in the warm light, she was softly humming to herself, stirring a rich, dark reduction sauce. Strong arms wrapped around her wide waist from behind. Roman pressed a kiss to the side of her neck, right below her ear. "Smells incredible, Mia Regina," he murmured, his hands resting possessively on the soft curve of her stomach. Penelope leaned back into his solid chest, completely at peace. She was no longer a victim hiding in the shadows. She was the heart of the empire, fiercely loved, fiercely protected, and finally undeniably free. "Just a little longer," she smiled, turning her head to kiss his jaw. "The king has to wait for his dinner." Roman chuckled, a dark, rich sound, and held his wife tighter. "For you, Penelope, I would wait a lifetime." If this dramatic story of survival, mafia romance, and discovering true self-worth kept you on the edge of your seat, don't let the journey end here. Hit that like button if you cheered for Penelope when she finally fought back, and share this video with anyone who loves a powerful, protective mob boss who treats his woman like an absolute queen. What would you have done in Penelope's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss out on our next thrilling, heart-pounding romance story.